Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about when something's maybe not working out with a key employee. That could be an executive, that could be someone who's very well liked at a company, could be someone who's in a good sales role, very client facing, but things aren't really working out either because of performance or because of just where the company's moving and the direction and strategy. And there's a lot of different reasons that can happen, or maybe the employee themselves is looking to leave. And there's a lot of times that maybe there's going to be a runway on that for both the company and for the employee and trying to work something out. What are some things that if a company wants to do that, Russell, that they should be considering when approaching an employee about that, or when they get approached by an employee in that regard?
Yeah. I see it a lot too, where there's, a transition from, one executive to the next. And this isn't a situation where it's so bad, there's got to be an abrupt handoff. It might just be a retirement or, changing of the guard. But there's often overlap. So, probably the first thing to think about is, if we're transitioning away from the current setup, what are we transitioning into? And what do we need from the person who is transitioning out before we get into the next thing. And one tool I've seen from a formalization of that standpoint is a transition agreement paired with a severance agreement. So what that would look like is, hey, we're going to employ you at will. So we're not guaranteeing you employment, but our plan is to employ you for another 90 days or however many days. And these are the job tasks we want you to focus on during this period. And if you work through this period and you sufficiently perform these transition tasks, then there's a severance available to you at the end of this period. And see attached Exhibit A for the severance agreement. And then you draft the severance agreement. It says, you're not otherwise entitled to severance, but we're willing to pay you X in severance upon successful completion of the transition agreement. And you get your release and you work through it that way.
Yeah, and I think a big part of this is just leaving yourself some flexibility as well if something happens, right? So there's mutual trust that has to happen here as far as like how everyone's going to act, and it's important to put what the expectations are during that time period and ensure that the employee that you're transitioning is meeting those expectations. And because dynamics can shift, things can change. Feelings on the transition, especially depending on what the circumstances are around the transition, can change over time. Frustrations can happen. And so, I think a very important part of this is to try to set those clear, memorialize those clear expectations on what's expected as far as continuing obligations or removing. Sometimes there's a phased approach, like, you're going to start out doing your job in the same way that you've been doing it, but then you're going to train this person, and then it's going to be another phase where now you're not doing certain things and someone else is, or this, those types of things. Also, how people are expected to conduct themselves and still follow the policies and rules of the company, and still be held to certain standards, and those types of things are all things I think that are important for everyone to get on the same page about when contemplating something like this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, transition, as we know, change can be bumpy and unnerving. So having flexibility is a key to managing through that. But also having some guidelines and having some frameworks. So flexible, but within a predetermined scope that's been clearly communicated, that hopefully there's buy-in on, so that we kind of know where we're going. Everyone kind of knows what the plan is. Everyone can at least tolerate what the plan is, if not love it. And within that, we'll manage through the bumpy spots that we can all cross the finish line together.
And to that point, I think if you go down this path, you have to be prepared to shorten the timeline for that reason, right? So when I talk about flexibility, I think that's one thing that comes to mind is that you've got some guidelines and parameters, but also you need to, as a company, be prepared that if things aren't working out, that timeline might not work out either. And so you need to be prepared to pivot and have a secondary plan in case, best laid plans and all that, right? So
as many of these as we've ever recorded, we've said, be flexible, be ready to adjust, be adaptable. That is a ongoing theme of our OK Work message for sure.
Yeah, to use the most popular word during COVID, pivot. Be ready to pivot. Well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.